Some of the biggest Roblox games and devs have gone missing and vanished from the platform. Today, we'll be looking at 5 Roblox games that have been abandoned along with some missing developers. Let's start with Dragon Riders, a game which has over 45 million visits but hasn't had much activity since 2017. The owner has also been missing for a few months now. Let's break it down because this gets really weird. It all started 7 years ago in 2017 when the owner Muted joined Roblox. Almost right away he started working on Dragon Raiders. In fact, it actually says the game was created before he even joined Roblox. Potentially a glitch, but this was the first game he launched and created. Right away it started to blow up. Muted had only been on a platform for a short time, but he was already starting to find success. Dragon Riders is very similar to the popular game Slither.io. In 2017, that game was exploding, so obviously a Roblox alternative also started to ride that viral wave. In just a few months, it was getting millions of visits, hundreds of players. The owner was on top of the world, but then, after only a few months, the owner did one last update and disappeared for 7 years. Dragon Riders hasn't had a proper update since 2017, the Twitter hasn't been active since 2017, even the group hasn't been touched since 2017. This game was viral for a few months and the owner just left it all without saying anything. The owner is still online here and there, but does go on long breaks. As mentioned, they haven't been online for the past 6 months now, and even when they are online, they never talk about or update Dragon Riders. What went wrong? Why would this owner abandon his game that was blowing up so suddenly and leave it all behind? Well, unfortunately, no one knows, but there are some clues we can dig up. As we can see here, a few years ago, the owner actually stated that they were working on an entire overhaul, potentially remaking the game and finally having a huge update. By this point, the game wasn't updated for years, but this potentially gave us the reason why. They were just working on remaking the game, so fans waited and waited, but nothing happened. It seemed to be over, but then it happened. 3 years later, after the game went missing, after fans gave up hope, something crazy happened. For the first time in 3 years, the game updated. This wasn't an official update or release, but this means the owner did some work on it. It seemed like maybe the game was back, but unfortunately, nothing came of this. The game was still being updated through the years, but just nothing was being released. Eventually, they even changed the description so it no longer said they were working on an update. There was even an update earlier this year, but obviously, nothing came of it. Weirdly enough, the owner isn't even coming back to fix glitches or problems. It seems as if they're just checking on it, or potentially having something big planned. With the glitches and lack of updates, the game has completely died, now having only a few people playing every day. Overall, we don't know why this developer left, but many assume that since they were just hopping on a trend, they never want to fully commit to this game. They quickly hopped on the trend, probably made some money, and moved on. Since the account was created and almost immediately started making this game, this was potentially an alt account of an already popular dev who just wanted to make a quick cash grab. We don't know the true story until the owner says anything, but that probably never happened, so we're left to speculate. A super confusing ending, but we're only getting crazier as the video goes on. And next we're talking about Road Trip, which has over 67 million visits but hasn't been updated in over 3 years. To understand the story, we have to rewind 16 years ago to 2008. When the owner JK Vet joined Roblox. For the first few years, JK Vet launched game after game. Most of them were just random projects, but JK Vet was trying. He would continue launching random games and projects year after year, but never found much success. He was a developer for some other projects, but he didn't have his own viral game just yet. It was now over 10 years since JK Vet joined Roblox, and he didn't have much to show for it. It seemed like his time as a developer was coming to an end, but 2018 would change his life forever, because in 2018 he would launch Road Trip, a game in which players are transported to a random map and are given a different challenge. A pretty unique game at the time, so it started to gain some traction. After a few months, the game was doing well and even started to go viral on YouTube, just making the game blow up even more. Finally, after 10 years, the owner had done it, and the game would just keep growing. In 2 years, amassing over 50 million visits. But after 3 years, the game would never be updated ever again. In 2021, some of the final updates were made and the game was never updated ever again. Due to this, the game was also completely died out, a lot of times having 0 active players. This developer spent years trying to get a viral game. Why did he just leave it? Well, in 2019, he launched another project, and to his surprise, this one would go viral as well, gaining over 50 million visits. But he was still working on both projects. Then in 2021, something crazy happened that would end his time working on both of these games. He launched another game, but this time it went super viral. It has now gained almost 200 million visits. It has more visits than his last 2 projects combined, and it's still doing well to this day. What it seemed like happened was this developer just had other priorities. Road Trip was already slowly dying out since people were getting bored of the same concept over and over again, and instead of trying to revive the game, he was just focusing on his other games that are more successful and have more potential. This story is crazy though, because this developer launched 3 viral projects in a row. The only downside is he had to abandon some to continue focusing on others. The story had a good ending, but the same can be said for our next game. Because we're talking about the Wild West, a game which has over 276 million visits but hasn't had a major update in over a year. Also, by the way, we're trying to reach 400,000 subs, so please consider subscribing, as videos take so long to make. Anyways, this game has 4 founders, Tamara, Kazuhara, Anti, and Tyridge. Most of these developers have been on the platform for years and have helped develop other projects, but for the most part, the Wild West was a huge breakthrough for all of them. For the first few years, the game was just in a testing phase, so it didn't blow up right away. However, the game was starting to gain traction even in the testing phase. The Wild West is an extremely well-made open-world Western-style game, where players essentially play as cowboys in an old-style environment, similar to the popular game Red Dead Redemption 2. Players can hunt, rob, and much more, or just roleplay. It's an open world, so it's all up to the player. This is a massive reason for the game's success. It was really well made, and this freedom allowed players to never really get bored. There's always something to do. Eventually, after a few years, the game would probably launch in around 2020. It already had a lot of attention from the testing phase, so it started off well. And now that it was starting to be open and finished, it started to blow up. 1 year later, it had 70 million visits and thousands playing. It would just keep growing and growing, now sitting at over 270 million visits. These developers have done it. After years of being on Roblox and working on this game for years, they finally had a viral game. But over time, this game would be updated less and less, and it started losing players. The community isn't happy, and it started losing hope. The time in between updates just keeps growing. As more time goes on without updates, the more players leave. What happened? These devs had a viral game, but have been slowly fading away and not updating it as much over time. Even some of the developers haven't been on Roblox for a few weeks to a month. Well, the truth is actually more dark than you think. And even if it seemed like these developers had it all, behind the scenes, this was their worst nightmare. In a developer blog, they explained that they made the Wild West with a small team, and when it blew up, the demand for new content was very extreme. So they were forcing themselves to provide updates and juggle other stuff. This caused the mental health of the developers to suffer, and they stated the entire studio had a dark few years. The game was viral, yes, but they were struggling. The devs then go on to explain that they want their studio to be more than just the Wild West, and are working on big new projects that are super complex and take a lot of time. So with everything, they just couldn't put much time into the Wild West, which is why the updates have been taking so long. And this is why people feel like the game is missing and the developers abandoned it. Overall, they are still working on the game, but due to mental health issues and them working on other projects, it has left the game abandoned with updates. It is good to know they have a lot planned for the future, that we just have to wait and see. A wild and sad ending, but we're only getting crazier. Because next we're talking about Craze, a game which has over 140 million visits but hasn't been updated in 3 years. This is the creator, G-Dun, who joined Roblox all the way back in 2010. For the first few years, they were pretty quiet, just working on random projects here and there. And for the first 7 years, G-Dun didn't really have much to show for it. But in 2017, he started properly working on and launching games, not knowing this will change his life forever. One of the first projects he was involved in was Hex Empires, a strategy game where you lead an empire, work on upgrades, and defend your army from being attacked. It was pretty well made and unique at the time, and this was the first time that any of his games started gaining some traction, now sitting at almost 800,000 visits, but he was only getting started. His next project would be even bigger, because his next game was Craze, a game in which is all about selecting the right color, along with other similar game modes and mini-games. It was fairly simple yet pretty fun, which helped the game stand out and gain popularity. Anyone could play and enjoy it since it was simple and there wasn't much skill involved. This game blew up at the time, in 2 years gaining over 120 million visits. The owner had finally done it. After being on the platform for almost 10 years, he had a viral game, but just after a few years in 2021, he would update the game for the last time and it was never updated ever again. Due to it being abandoned, it was also completely died out, a lot of times having 0 active players. What happened? Well, even before the game was abandoned, it was already starting to die out since the concept was getting boring and stale to people. The creator spent years and now his viral game was fading away, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. He was giving up on Craze, but behind the scenes, he was working on launching another game, that being Farming and Friends. This seemed to be G-Dun's last hope. His viral game was dead, and now the question was, could he get another popular game? Well, luckily for him, the answer is yes. The game also blew up and now has more visits than Craze, sitting at almost 149 million visits. It's also actively being worked on, and still has thousands of players. In this case, the owner took a risk and abandoned the game, instead of trying to save it to work on another project. And luckily it worked out. And now this game seems to be his main focus, since Craze has fully died out. A good ending, but the same can be said for our next game. Because we're talking about Parkour Ninja, which has over 730 million visits, but hasn't been updated in over 2 years. The owner Aris also hasn't been online in almost a month. Let's break down what happened. The creator joined Roblox back in 2008. Right away, they started working on and launching projects, and for the next few years, the creator would go on to launch a ton of projects, some random and some actually serious. One of their first breakthroughs was Red Plumber Adventure Obby, which has over 20 million visits. This showed the creator the potential his games had, and for years he kept launching game after game, trying to recreate the success, but it wasn't working out. Year after year, project after project, the owner didn't have anything go viral like that again. Every project wouldn't do that well. It seemed like all his years of efforts were coming to an end, but 6 years later from when he joined, his next project would change everything. Because it was Parkour Ninja, a PvP fast-paced game where players fight each other using different weapons. Unlike our other games though, this didn't blow up right away. 1 year into the game, it had 8,000 visits. It wasn't looking promising, but the owner kept improving the game over time. 2 years since launch, the game would start to pick up some traction, and the game would cross 75,000 visits. It still wasn't his most viral game, but it had a lot of potential and is only growing bigger every year. Then after this is when the game really started to go viral and it blew up. 2 years later it went from 75,000 visits to 36 million and is only growing bigger, eventually reaching over 700 million visits. Slowly this game turned into one of the biggest. The owner had finally done it. Year after year, game after game, the owner had the viral game they spent years chasing, but in 2022 this will all end. Because 2022 was the last time the game would update, and there wasn't much before that either. No group shouts since 2019, no tweets since 2020, and as mentioned, the owner even goes absent on Roblox for a month or so. They don't seem to be too active. Sadly, no one really knows what happened. What it seems like happened is that the game could have got boring to the developer. The concept never really changes, so after years, it would make sense for the owner to just get bored of it. In general also, the developer's been making games on the platform for over 16 years now, and 10 of those years were spent on this game. You can imagine how after that many years it got stale. Also, the game is still kinda active, having a few hundred players every day, so it hasn't completely died out. We don't truly know until the owner says anything, leaving this a super confusing and mysterious case. Overall, a lot of developers go missing, and if you want to learn about some even crazier stories, check it out here and I'll see you in the next one.